The sun bled crimson across the Wyoming horizon, painting the jagged peaks of the Tetons in hues of fire and shadow. On a lonely stretch of the Double Bar Ranch, where the wind whispered secrets through the sagebrush, a horse screamed, a sound so raw, so desperate, it could tear a man's heart in two. Amos Caldwell, a rancher carved from the hard oak of tradition, stood frozen, his calloused hands gripping a frayed rope. Beside him, a young colt thrashed against its bindings, eyes wild with terror, its hoof caught in a cruel twist of wire left by some careless hand. The colt's mother, a sturdy bay mare named Juniper, pawed the earth, her whinnies rising like a plea to the heavens. Amos's jaw tightened, his weathered face a map of lines etched by decades of unyielding routine. Tradition dictated he cut the colt loose and let nature decide its fate. Weakness had no place on the frontier. Yet, as the colt's cries grew weaker, something ancient and unspoken stirred in Amos's chest, a tremor that threatened to unravel everything he'd ever known. "Please," he heard his own voice whisper, though no one was there to hear it. "I am begging you, untie it." The words hung in the air, a betrayal of the code he'd sworn to uphold. "If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the power of a single moment to change everything, please hit that like button, drop a comment, share this story, and subscribe to Gentle Hearts. Your support keeps these stories alive, and we'd love to hear how this tale touches you." Amos Caldwell was a man of the land, born to the rhythm of cattle drives and the creak of saddle leather. At 57, he carried the weight of a life spent wrestling survival from the unforgiving plains. The Double Bar Ranch, sprawling across 10,000 acres of Wyoming's rugged heart, had been his father's, and his father's before that. Tradition was the backbone of the Caldwell name, never questioned the old ways, never bend to sentiment. A horse too weak to stand was left to die, a calf caught in a storm was nature's loss. Amos had lived by this creed, his heart hardened like the frostbitten earth beneath his boots. But the colt, barely a month old, with its spindly legs and trembling flanks, was no ordinary loss. Its name was Sage, a name Amos's daughter, Clara, had given it in a moment of childish defiance. Clara, now 16, was the only softness Amos allowed himself, though he'd never admit it. She'd been at the barn that morning, brushing Juniper's mane, her laughter a rare melody in the ranch's endless grind. Now, as the colt's blood stained the dirt, Amos felt her absence like a blade. She was at school in town, oblivious to the drama unfolding, but he could imagine her eyes, bright, accusing, demanding he save the creature she loved. The wire was a cruel relic, likely left by a drifter who'd camped on the ranch's edge last spring. It had snaked around Sage's hoof, cutting deep into the tender flesh above the fetlock. Every thrash tightened its grip, and Amos knew the leg was likely broken. Tradition screamed to walk away. A broken colt was a liability, a drain on resources. He'd seen his father put down horses for less, a single bullet to spare them suffering in the ranch expense. But as Amos knelt beside Sage, the colt's eyes locked onto his, dark, liquid, pleading. Juniper, tethered nearby, stomped and snorted, her maternal instinct a force as fierce as the wind howling through the valley. Amos's hands hovered over the wire, his knife glinting in the fading light. To cut it free was to defy everything he'd been taught, to invite ridicule from the other ranchers who'd call him soft, weak, a fool chasing a lost cause. Yet, as Sage's breaths grew shallow, Amos felt a crack in the armor he'd worn for decades. He thought of Clara, of her belief that every life mattered, no matter how small. He thought of his late wife, Sarah, whose gentle heart had once softened his own, before grief and time had buried it deep. Amos worked the wire, his fingers clumsy with urgency. The metal was rusted, stubborn, biting into his palms as he twisted it free. Blood slicked his hands, his own, the colt's, it didn't matter. Sage's cries softened to whimpers, and Juniper's agitation eased, her head lowering as if she understood. The wire came loose, but the leg was a mess, swollen and bent at an unnatural angle. Amos's chest tightened. He'd freed the colt, but for what? A slow death, a mercy killing. He sat back on his heels, the weight of his decision pressing down like the mountains themselves. The ranch was quiet now, save for the wind and the colt's ragged breathing. Amos thought of the other ranchers, men like Old Man Tucker, who'd spit in the dirt and call this a waste of time. He thought of his father's voice, cold and final, "The land don't care for your feelings, boy." But then he saw Clara's face again, her stubborn hope, her belief that love could mend what logic deemed lost. He couldn't let her come home to a dead colt, not when he'd seen the way she'd cradled Sage's head, whispering promises of a future galloping through the meadows. The nearest vet was in Jackson, a 2-hour drive over rough roads. Amos had no trailer ready, no time to waste. He rigged a makeshift sling from an old blanket, hoisting Sage into the bed of his battered pickup. Juniper followed, tethered to the tailgate, her presence a quiet demand to stay near her foal. The drive was a blur of dust and dusk, the truck rattling over potholes as Amos gripped the wheel, his mind a storm of doubt and determination. What was he doing? Risking his reputation, his resources, for a colt that might not survive the night. Yet, every glance in the rearview mirror, at Sage's trembling form and Juniper's steadfast gaze, pushed him forward. At the vet's drive, Lena Harper, a no-nonsense woman with gray streaks in her braid, took one look at the colt and shook her head. "Bad break," she said, her voice clipped but not unkind. "Surgery's a long shot, and it'll cost you." Amos didn't flinch. He thought of Clara, of Sarah, of the man he'd been before the ranch had hardened him. "Do it," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his heart. The surgery was a gamble, a delicate dance of steel and suture under the vet's practiced hands. Amos waited in the truck, the night pressing in, the stars cold and indifferent above. He thought of the ranch, of the cattle waiting to be moved, of the bills piling up on his kitchen table. He thought of the whispers that would spread through the valley, Amos Caldwell, gone soft, breaking tradition for a half-dead horse. But he also thought of the colt's eyes, of Clara's smile, of the way Sarah used to hum while tending the garden, her hands gentle even with the smallest blooms. Hours later, drive, Harper emerged, her face unreadable. "He's stable," she said. "But it's touch and go. You'll need to keep him still, keep him fed, keep him fighting. And that leg might never be right." Amos nodded, his throat tight. He drove home under a moonless sky, Sage cradled in the truck bed, Juniper plodding behind. The ranch loomed dark and silent, a testament to the life he'd always known, one of sacrifice, of practicality, of tradition above all. The weeks that followed were a test of will. Amos built a sling to keep Sage off his leg, hauling feed and water to the barn at all hours. Clara, home from school, became his shadow, her hands steady as she cleaned the wound, her voice soft as she sang to the colt. She never asked why Amos had done it, why he'd risked so much. She didn't need to. Her gratitude was in her eyes, in the way she hugged him, fierce and fleeting, before running back to Sage. The other ranchers noticed, of course. Old Man Tucker stopped by, his sneer sharp as barbed wire. "Wasting good money on a cripple," he said, spitting into the dirt. Amos didn't argue, didn't explain. He just kept working, kept believing, kept defying the voice in his head that sounded too much like his father's. Sage grew stronger, his eyes brighter, though his limp was a constant reminder of the odds stacked against him. Juniper never left his side, her presence a quiet strength that anchored them all. Amos began to see the ranch differently, not as a battleground against nature, but as a place where life could be nurtured, not just survived. Months passed, and Sage took his first tentative steps without the sling. Clara whooped, her laughter echoing across the valley, and Amos felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. The colt would never run like the others, never carry a rider or herd cattle, but he was alive, a living testament to a choice Amos had made against every instinct. The ranchers' whispers faded, replaced by a grudging respect, or at least silence. Amos didn't care. He'd broken tradition, and in doing so, he'd found something he'd lost long ago, a piece of his heart, buried under years of dust and duty. Clara named the moment her miracle, and though Amos would never say it aloud, he agreed. The ranch was still hard, still unforgiving, but it was also a place where a colt could live, where a girl could hope, where a man could change. As the sun sets on this story, we hope it's touched your heart as much as it's touched ours. If Sage and Amos's journey moved you, please like, comment, and share this video. Subscribe to Gentle Hearts for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances. Your support means the world to us. Before we go, we'd love to hear from you. Please drop a comment below and tell us, what tradition would you break for someone or something you love?